All right, let's dive right into the high-stakes world of medical device logistics in Saudi Arabia. This is a place where one tiny mistake in the supply chain can have, life or death consequences. Today, we're not just going to read the SFDA's rulebook. Nah, we're going to break it all down so you can build a supply chain that's not just compliant, but completely unbreakable. In the world of medical devices, the supply chain is a literal lifeline. I mean, think about it. From a life-saving implant to a critical diagnostic tool, its journey from the factory to the patient is basically a chain of trust. But if just one link breaks, a small temperature change, a tiny licensing error, one missing document, the consequences can be, well, they can be really severe. So you've got to ask yourself this critical question. How confident are you really in every single step of your logistics process? Is your chain of custody truly unbroken? Because when it comes to patient safety, there's just no room for doubt. To figure that out, we're going to tackle this in 5 parts. First, we'll get crystal clear on who is responsible for what. Then, we'll get our hands dirty and inspect the physical stuff, your warehouses and your vehicles. After that, we're diving into the operational heart of it all, tracking, tracing, and recalls. We'll also untangle the very tricky rules of outsourcing. And finally, we'll talk about maybe the most important part, building a real culture of quality. Okay, first up, let's untangle this web of responsibility. You see, in the eyes of the SFDA, there's no such thing as a gray area. Every single player, from the manufacturer to the distributor, has a very clearly defined role and a specific set of licensing rules they absolutely must follow. So look at this table. It's not just about the rules, it's about the why behind them. Check out those pitfalls. A manufacturer needing a separate license for every single branch? That's not just red tape, it's about the SFDA having eyes on every single point of production. An importer having to wait for marketing authorization? Well, that stops unvetted devices from ever hitting the market. And all those detailed rules for 3PLs? That's all about accountability. Making a lessee get their own license for each warehouse means they can't just hide behind their logistics provider. No way. They are directly on the hook. The SFDA leaves zero room for finger pointing. And for any companies outside of Saudi Arabia, this role is absolutely key. The authorized representative, or AR, isn't just some local contact. They are, for all intents and purposes, the legal version of the foreign manufacturer on Saudi soil. They're the official link, the go-between with the SFDA. Now, the importer, well, it's pretty much what it sounds like. This is the company responsible for physically bringing the device into the country. They're the gatekeepers, and it's their job to make sure everything that crosses the border meets SFDA standards from the very first moment it arrives. All right, so we've got the paperwork down, but what about the real world, the physical stuff? A license doesn't mean a thing if your warehouse is a mess or your trucks aren't up to snuff. This next part is all about where compliance gets tangible. We're talking steel, concrete, and wheels. So the SFDA sets a pretty clear baseline for warehouses. You can think of it as the minimum price of admission for handling medical devices. The space has to be specifically for this purpose. It's got to be clean, well lit, and have proper ventilation to stop any contamination. And of course, things like safety tools are mandatory. These are not suggestions, believe me. They are absolute non-negotiables. But here's where it gets a little tricky, right? The rules use words like sufficient. What in the world does sufficient actually mean when an auditor is standing there in front of you with a clipboard? This is where you have to go beyond just reading the rules and start thinking about best practices. So the whole point is to turn those vague words into real, physical actions. Clean means using things like impermeable surfaces that you can actually sanitize properly. Orderly means having a physically separate, clearly labeled quarantine area for bad stock. For anything refrigerated, you absolutely must have a backup power plan. And don't just stick a thermometer on the wall. You've got to place your sensors in the hot spots, near doors, windows, vents, the places where temperature is most likely to go crazy. We've actually heard stories of audits being failed just because a sensor was put in the coldest part of the room, totally missing the heat spikes that were ruining product on the top shelf. And hey, don't think this logic stops at the warehouse door. Your vehicles are basically just moving warehouses. They have to be clean, they have to protect from the weather, and they need electronic monitoring. And the SFDA is incredibly clear on one thing you see here. If your truck doesn't have a cover, it cannot carry medical devices. Period. No exceptions. Okay, so our buildings and our trucks are solid. Now we got to talk about what's inside them. Being able to trace every single item is really the backbone of a safe supply chain. You have to know where every device is all the time. The SFDA demands a smart system for rotating your stock. It's kind of like managing the milk in your fridge. You could use FIFO, first in, first out, and just use the carton you bought first, but that's a bit risky. The much smarter way is FEFO, first expiry, first out. That's where you check the dates and use the milk that's going to expire the soonest, no matter when you bought it. For medical devices, FEFO isn't just smart, it's pretty much the gold standard for keeping patients safe.
So what happens when things go wrong? Just imagine you get that call. Lot number ABC123 has a problem. Boom, the clock is ticking. Your recall plan needs to be a drill you've practiced, not some dusty binder on a shelf. Can you, right now, trace that lot number to every single place it's been? Is your quarantine area ready to go? Are your reporting procedures to the SFDA all lined up? And every single action has to be documented. Because if you can't prove what you did, in the eyes of an auditor, it never happened.
Now, outsourcing your storage to a 3PL partner, it can seem like an easy way out, but you've got to be careful. It adds a whole new layer of complexity. And you need to remember the golden rule here. You can delegate the work, but you can never, ever delegate the ultimate responsibility. And this quote right here, straight from the regulations, it just nails it. Your contract can't be some vague agreement. It has to be a detailed official document that leaves absolutely no question about who's responsible for what at every single touchpoint. So before you even think about signing a 3PL contract, run through this checklist. Is the contract properly authenticated? Does it specify the exact zones you're leasing, not just the warehouse? And really pay attention to this last one, because it's a huge trip up for a lot of companies. Have you, the one leasing the space, gotten your own SFDA license for that specific location? This is non-negotiable. The SFDA wants to know that you are directly accountable for that space. Okay, finally, let's get to what's maybe the most critical piece of this entire puzzle: your people. All the best warehouses, vehicles, and contracts in the world don't mean a thing without documented procedures and a team that's trained and totally committed to following them. Your standard operating procedures, your SOPs, think of them as your team's playbook for compliance. They have to be written down, and they need to cover everything we've talked about. Super detailed descriptions of your storage and quarantine areas, your specific inventory system, and your step-by-step process for a recall. This isn't just some manual. This documentation is your evidence. It's what you show an auditor to prove your compliance is real and happens every single day. And that really brings us to the main point here. The goal isn't just to pass an audit once a year. The real goal is to bake these practices into the daily work of every single person who touches a medical device. It has to become a part of your company's DNA. So as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with this question to think about. When you really, honestly look at your logistics operations, from the licenses to the transport to your procedures, what do you see? Do you see a source of strength and patient trust? Or do you see a chain full of potential risks just waiting to be exposed? The choice really is yours.